Our Bible word is Mark 14, verses 22 to 24. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many." So here we have the words of institution for Holy Communion, or also known as the Lord's Supper. And our earliest version of these words is found in the writings of the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 11, verses 23 to 25. And that was written in the mid-50s or so. And the Gospel of Mark, written, scholars speculate, somewhere between 66 to 70 AD. And now, of course, it's a time of Jesus. We are celebrating, or we are moving in towards this time period also of Easter. And now our word focuses on the words of institution. And I want to give background first to what a typical Passover meal would have looked like back in the time of Jesus. Even today, when the Jews come together, they celebrate the Passover meal or the Pesach. They have everything ready beforehand. There's the bitter herbs, there's the sauce that the herbs are dipped in, there's of course the Paschal lamb, there's the unleavened bread, there's a cup of wine, etc. And of course this meal also probably developed over the centuries, but back in the time of Jesus we have a rough idea of what took place. And there was actually this liturgical sequence that the Passover meal followed. And firstly, there was the first cup of wine. Okay, first of all, everything was set. Everything was already prepared. The Paschal lamb, the meat, the herbs, etc. That was already kind of set in place. And now it would begin, and first of all was the first cup of wine. And at the head of proceedings would be the head of the family. That would normally be the father. And then the head of the family, he would pronounce also this blessing over the cup of wine. And his words will be something like this: "Praised are you, Lord our God, King of the world, who creates the fruit of the vine." Now, of course, this cup is not per person. This one cup is shared amongst all those present. And followed, so where everybody had a sip of the cup, then they would have bitter herbs. And these herbs were dipped in a sauce. And these herbs were to remind the Israelites of the time of bitter suffering which their forefathers experienced in Egypt. So that was the first cup. And now followed the second cup. And here the youngest son at the table, he would ask his father, "Why do we do this? Why is this night different to other nights? Why do we eat unleavened bread, etc.?" Maybe the youngest disciple in the circle of Jesus' followers, maybe they asked the question, because remember Jesus, he was the host, he would have been the head of the table. Then normally the host or the head, Jesus, he would give an explanation of the history of the Exodus. Normally a short explanation of what we find in Deuteronomy 26, verses 5 to 11. It speaks of Abram and his descendants, that they went to Egypt, and eventually they became enslaved, but then God came and he rescued them through the Exodus. And of course, also, so this is a commemoration of the past act of redemption. It was to remember what God has done for our people. And of course the Exodus, that was the first great act of redemption. And now Jesus, he associates this meal, his life, his ministry, especially now what he is going to go through his crucifixion. This is also an act of redemption. Now, of course, redemption means to purchase somebody's freedom. It's people who are in bondage, they are slaves. You redeem them. In other words, you pay money, so to speak, to make them free. And that's what God did through Moses. He redeemed people from bondage, from slavery. Now, Jesus, he's also the Redeemer. He redeems God's people also from bondage, but from evil, from sin, from death. So remember this. There's this redemption under Moses and now the redemption under Jesus. The new Moses, the new Exodus that's taking place. Specifically, it's happening also through his death and resurrection. And of course, followed after this explanation of this redemption history, then they would also sing part of the Hallel, yeah, specifically speaking to Psalms 113 to 118. So here Psalms 113 and 114 would be sung. It's part of the Hallel, especially the Passover Hallel. Of course, Hallel means praise. And so this hymn, these psalms would be sung as in celebration of God's redemption, and then people would take a sip from the second cup of wine. And now would follow the meal proper. And now at this meal, this is where the unleavened bread would be eaten and also the paschal lamb. And here also the head, Jesus, he would have lifted up the platter of bread. He would have spoken words about it, saying this is the bread of affliction that was eaten by our forefathers in Egypt, etc. And then he would pronounce a blessing over the bread also. And this blessing would be something like, "Praised are you, Lord our God, King of the world, who makes bread to come forth from the earth." And then those present would then say, also answer, Amen. Then the head of the family, or Jesus, he would have broken a piece of bread off for each person present. It would have been handed down from hand to the person who receives it. And normally this would have been done in silence. But Jesus interrupts the silence and he speaks the word that we find in our Bible text where he says, "Take, eat, this is my body." So Jesus associates this redemption history now with himself, with his body. And after this, those present, they would also enjoy the paschal lamb, the meat that is present. And now would come the third cup. And this is also called the cup of the supper or the cup of blessing. And again, the host or Jesus would have spoken words of blessing over it. Again, we can say it's, "Praised are you, Lord our God, King of the world, who creates the fruit of the vine." And so, and now this cup again will be passed around. Everybody will take a sip of it. But Jesus, this cup after supper, this is where he spoke the other words in our Bible word, where he says, "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many." So we can see here originally the Lord's Supper, it was a proper meal and there were different stages to it. So it was at this third cup, this cup after supper, where Jesus said this meal of, "This is my blood of the new covenant." And after this third cup, they would move to a fourth cup. And this would be the cup also of consummation. It looks forward when God will finally redeem his people. But this cup was not drunk by Jesus. He said, "I'm not going to eat of this again until I enter my kingdom." And so there's an anticipation for the future. This is Jesus' last meal. He's not drinking this fourth cup. And he says, "I will drink this at the messianic banquet when he comes, when this kingdom of the Messiah will be established in full." And also, after this fourth cup, it will be accompanied by singing of the rest of the Hallel, and that would be Psalms 115 to 118. We can read there in verse 26. It says there, "And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives." So that would refer to the second half of the Hallel. That's Psalms 115 to 118 that Jesus and his disciples would have sung there. Now let's go back to the words of Jesus where he says, "Take, eat, this is my body." So Jesus identifies it with himself. And he also says, whenever you break bread together as my people, whenever you share this Passover meal or this Lord's Supper, I am present, I am with you, etc. Of course, it also commemorates Jesus' death. Like the Passover meal commemorated Egypt, the Exodus from Egypt. Now this meal also commemorates Jesus and his death, his sacrifice. And of course, in the next verse, Jesus connects this cup of wine with this is the blood of the new covenant. And this, if you go read Exodus 24 verses 6 to 8, there's Moses at Mount Sinai, and he's ratifying the covenant that God has made with his people. And there were oxen who were slaughtered, and Moses took the blood, he sprinkled it on the altar, he sprinkled it on the people, and say, now our covenant, in other words, our agreement has been ratified. It exists. Now Jesus associates, this is now a new Sinai to a degree. I mean, this is the new Exodus. Jesus is the leader of this Exodus. And he's now ratifying a new covenant. He's inaugurating a new covenant through his blood, through the sprinkling of his blood, so to speak. And of course, it also speaks of this blood which is shed for many. And that recalls Isaiah 53 verses 12 that says, and he bore the sin of many. So this is not just about a sacrifice that initiates a new covenant. It's also a sacrifice of atonement. This is to forgive people's sins. And also Jesus, he says early in the gospel, in Mark 10 verses 45, he has come to give his life a ransom for many. Now the word ransom and redeem, it has the same meaning. It's to purchase somebody's freedom. It's to make them free. So it's to give his life as a ransom. In other words, as a purchase price to make people free who are in bondage. So this is Jesus. He institutes this Lord's Supper, what we know as Holy Communion. And he identifies himself with it. This is my body. And remember me this, and I'll be in your presence when you do this. Also, this is my blood. This is the new covenant. Also, this is a sacrifice of atonement. Blood has been shed. He has given his life for the sake of many. Through this act, we also experience the forgiveness of sins.